let's jump into it here. Again, my name is Andrew King. I am the editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician Magazine, and joining me this evening, we're very pleased to have Miranda Mulholland. Now, quick background here, Miranda is an artist. She's a creator, she's an entrepreneur, she's a singer, she plays the fiddle. She's, in addition to recording her own material, she's currently a member of the duo Harrow Fair. She's performed and recorded with a list of incredible talent, including Sarah Sleen, Great Lakes Swimmers, Jim Cuddy, Justin Rutledge. She's got her own record label, Roaring Girl Records, and just this past summer, in August 2017, we had the inaugural edition of her music festival in Gravenhurst, Ontario, the Sawdust City Music Festival. It had a killer lineup. I'm told that we're going to be back for 2018 as well. So plenty to talk about here, and part of the reason I really wanted to focus on the various hats that Miranda wears and the various irons she has in the fire is that she's been very transparent in that, you know, even with a musician at this level of their career with this many accolades and accomplishments, it's still a challenge viably making a living as a musician, and she's stepped up to kind of share that story, be very transparent about it, and most importantly, try and lobby to get other creators together to unify, have a unified voice, and start pushing for change within the industry, at the government and policy level, and a lot more. So, without further ado, Miranda, it's a pleasure having you join us this evening.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
And as Miranda and I were talking about earlier, you know, we build this as talking about some of the challenges that come with our current digital landscape. But these are things that A, are very well documented, and B, that Miranda herself has spent a lot of time over the past year discussing. And so I guess to be optimistic, to be positive, to be solution driven, we will chat a little bit about some of these challenges and how they're affecting creators and musicians, but we're going to really push the weight of the conversation towards some of the different solutions to these, some of the ways that artists can come together and push for change, some of the ways you can diversify and maximize your revenue streams as a creator. But let's start here, and I'm casting a wide net, Miranda, but I think the real core when you gave your incredible speech called Redefining Success in a Digital Marketplace to the Economic Club of Canada, one of the big kind of anchors of the whole talk, and actually why we find ourselves in a number of these challenges here, has to do with Canadian copyright law. Can you give us a really quick just kind of primer as to, well, first off, some of the challenges inherent in Canada's current copyright legislation, and basically why it's not working in this digital age, at least in favor of the creators?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons that it isn't working is because it was developed at a time when the internet was just a baby, you know, and I'm 37 now, and so I'm in that funny little bracket of people who had an analog growing up, teenage years, and then went into digital in my 20s, and a lot of those policies were made just when that was starting, and you know, we as creators have been asked to do a lot of adapting with the digital age, and also with the way that touring is, how difficult it is to tour, you make a record for however many thousands of dollars, and then you get it out in the world and you get cents back, you know, for many streams, and so one of the big problems is that the policies have not adapted. They are so out of date. They are 20 years old and do not reflect the new kind of world that we live in, and I think that's the very bottom, sort of lowest hanging fruit of the copyright problem, which is just that they are so wildly out of date and do not reflect the new digital era.
Mm-hmm. So YouTube and streaming services here, we've got at separate points because they are different animals and they do work a little differently, both in how content gets put onto those various platforms, how the content is disseminated, and how revenue is disseminated. So again, I'll point you to the two features in the handout section there. To grab those, there's a lot of figures, a lot of you know, what we currently know about how these services work, because in a lot of cases there's kind of some intentional secrecy there from well, a few different sides, but encourage you to check that out. But I guess the question is, like, Miranda, I think when we were talking last, like, Harrow Fair has had some success. You know, people are always talking about playlist curation being the new radio and the main form of music discovery, you've had some songs that have been placed on some fairly influential playlists. I guess the question is, like, what are you seeing in terms of revenue generated from streaming? What has it replaced for you and other artists as far as platforms for A, music discovery, and B, music consumption, and the revenue that can be generated from that?
Well, the revenue that's generated obviously is pretty negligible. Although, like you point out, YouTube is very different from the streaming services, and I think the big word there is accountability. I'm certainly not, I'm not asking that we rewind time and everybody makes 8 tracks, or I mean, vinyl's back in. That's great, but and so I see that streaming is definitely a way of the future. People are, having any song at the tip of your finger on your phone is pretty incredible, and what an amazing resource. And actually, I heard a report that Canada is actually doing quite well in getting people to subscribe to streaming, and better than, in fact, a lot of countries. So that's good news, because the streaming services, the subscribed services, they do bring in, a fraction more than the ad-based services. So I can give you some quick numbers that it is a little difficult, though, the numbers, because they aren't sort of per song for everybody, especially if you're in sort of a niche, more of a niche kind of genre. I mean, Harrow Fair is Americana. And we're not pulling in Drake's numbers or anything, or Taylor Swift's numbers. So and because it's based on market share, if Taylor Swift had, her 0.00% wouldn't be the same as of what I have. So just a comparison, though, on the ad-based service, this is for 1 month. This is for December of last year. We had one song that was put on a couple of playlists, and so say for 5,900, so arguably 6,000 streams, we got $12, and that's 0.002 cents per stream. But then versus the subscriber, when people had actually spent their $9.99 or whatever they spend on Spotify or Apple Music, say we had 7,500 streams, and that equaled $48. Which is 0.006. I mean, these are not huge numbers by any means, but at least there is a difference, and encouraging your fans to use the subscriber-based model is definitely a step in the right direction. Where I had a little bit of opposition, and sort of what part of the speech was about, was just how many jobs we are forced to do as musicians, and not just create the music that people want to listen to, but now we also have to be our own publicists and do the work of the series. So they can put up ads, and they can have billboards featuring artists. I just saw a great one for Whitehorse when their record came out in Yonge and Dundas Square. That's awesome, but they're not really jumping in the way that they're asking us to. So we're basically doing their advertising for them by telling our fans to use Spotify, use Apple Music, use Google Play, and that's sort of where I have a problem with that model. It's a lack of accountability, and if you take the word accountability and going back to YouTube, they have sort of the least percentage of accountability, if we're going to go percentage wise, or yeah, they get a failing grade from me.
Well, and fair. Once again, I'm just to not be redundant here, and to provide people with some great sources of information. In addition to the 2 features that Canadian Musician has done on streaming services and YouTube separately, yeah, a lot of this, especially like on the point of accountability, that makes clear kind of where Miranda's coming from. You can find a full video recording and an audio transcript of her speech, Redefining Success in a Digital Marketplace, at her website. So we encourage you to do that. And, well, actually why don't we move away from streaming and YouTube for the time being, until we can come back with some more ideas on how people can at least somewhat successfully navigate these new waters. But right there, like you were saying, more responsibilities, less time. Artists are wearing more hats. You're having to do a lot more internally. I guess the question, like, as someone that's been in the industry for a while and who's worked with major companies, and also done a lot of this work yourself, especially more recently, like you say, how do you balance, like, how do you decide when you're best served with a limited amount of resources to reinvest in your career, to decide whether you should be seeking outside help for, say, a publicity campaign, or, say, album distribution or radio tracking, versus trying to do the best you can on your own to save some money?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm still experimenting, so I have made a few investments in the last few years. With my record deal that I have at the moment, it originally included a publicist, which was sort of why I signed it, and why that was really important to me. That did change. It has changed, and so I made the conscious choice to invest in a publicist, for my label, but also for me, to have on retainer. This was an important thing to me because I don't have the time to go along with the rule of 13. I mean, it used to be the rule of 3. If you see something 3 times, you might be likely to buy it. But now, we're so inundated with ads and targeted ads, and I just don't have the spending power to buy targeted ads on whatever podcast is the hottest now, or whatever. And so to have someone who's actually doing that for me, and using anything I'm doing creatively and then spinning it to create a story, or to maximize, I guess, its potential. That to me was a really a valuable spend. I did also hire somebody in Los Angeles to pitch songs for television and film, which is a crapshoot. I mean, found money always is, but at the end of the day, that ended up being a bit of a loss, because it is very expensive to hire somebody who is at their top of their game, but there's no guarantee in that particular industry. So I'm learning. I'm certainly learning, and I wish I could give a formula, but I think part of the process of learning is good. I mean, I'm glad I went through all of that, and I'm finding out what could work. Because I mean, if you have way more marketable music, I'm sure that would be actually easier for you. Or if you're writing specifically for that thing, I personally am not. So, yeah.
I more than appreciate you being so candid and transparent. And so, like, with the next question, I certainly don't want to delve too far into your business. But on the note of disappearing and shrinking revenue streams, I mean, we mentioned at the outset, both touring and recording, you have lent your talents to records by a host of what we can call very successful projects, and with very successful Canadian artists. So I know this isn't a directly related to our digital marketplace, but that increased competition, that saturation in the music industry, less money going around to more artists than ever before. Looking at now to, say, 10 years ago, how big of a difference is it as far as, like, some of these recording session and sideman performance opportunities? Yeah, just comparing from our current industry to, when you were, I guess, on your way up and had worked on a lot of these projects. Is it a very vast difference as far as what people can expect as far as revenue from these opportunities?
Yeah, and I think if I'd known my worth a little better when I was younger, I would have made some different decisions. One of the things, especially, and I don't know if anybody who's listening is a side musician, but one of the things that I think I did was I felt so delighted to have a job, to be recording on these, especially with a lot of artists who I admired, and I was very fortunate to be asked. And I took what I was offered, and I was really glad about that. But what I realize now is how much of my own playing, of my own thoughts, arrangements, skill that I brought to the table above and beyond being having a piece of music put in front of me and then performing that, and that kind of intellectual content and property of what you bring to something is so important and should be so valued. So, for example, a session fee, you get a session fee if you go in and you play on someone's music. And if it's, say, a film score or something, perhaps they have the music in front of you, and then you get, I'm a violinist, I get like first or second violin part, and I play that or whatever. But And that's one thing for sure. And that's sort of, the union has some really good guidelines for what that should be. But when you go in and they say, okay, well, this is the mood of the song, and this is the idea, and like, what do you think? And then you're bringing your own skill, and they're paying for that. Obviously they're giving you their session fee, but when you hear that song or you see that movie down the road, and you got your one-time session fee, and yet your arrangement is up there on the screen. That's something to consider when you're negotiating for those. And I think if I'd known when I was younger, I would have been a little bit more careful about what I asked for, or how I valued myself. So it's hard for me to say what's changed, because I think I undervalued myself wildly when I was in my 20s or early 20s, and even into my 30s. And so now I'm a little bit more careful about the projects that I'm a part of, or what my remuneration is. I have a funny little key. It's good people, good music, good pay, and it has to be 2 out of 3, or I won't take the job, because you've always got something. Even if there's one thing that bugs you, you've got the other 2 things that actually make why being a musician is what we're doing. I mean, there's that it has to have 2 out of 3 of those, or why am I not just an accountant or something? Not that there's anything wrong with being an accountant. I actually need one right now. So, but I think we're very lucky we get to play music, but we do pay that sort of fun, lucky tax a lot, and I think valuing yourself is key.
Yeah, very well put. And actually, we're going to change the format here. Typically, right now, we go to some questions and then jump to the second half, where we're talking about solutions, proactivity. But you just led us right into that part beautifully. So I'll tell you what, anyone that's got some questions, send them through now or as they come up. I'll pose them to Miranda as we're going if they're relevant, and if not, again, we'll save them for the end. But in the meantime, on that note, I think this is a great spot to jump ahead, because like you were just saying there, valuing your input as a side person, or like as a session player, there's a good question, and something I never thought of. If you are coming and helping with an arrangement, and like in your position, say performing with a rock band or folk musician that doesn't have a great knowledge of strings, and thus you're doing more than just performing some notes on a page, are you now at the place where you can and have successfully received songwriting credits in such scenarios?
Yeah, with some, it's interesting. With some artists, with some musicians, I've brought that exact thing up. I mean, even just this past year, I've become more sort of strident about it, because I had an experience where, I created an entire arrangement on the spot, and there was no arrangement credit given. I mean, I performed in a band for 7 years, and sort of similar things happened. One point, I've been told by a musician that it was just too difficult, or it was just too complicated, sorry, to give band members a part of songwriting when registering SOCAN. And actually, for any songwriters, it is not difficult. You just have to write in people's names and give the percentage, and they do the math for you. And actually, if anyone is interested in keeping a loyal band, that's a very easy way of making people feel valued, which I think is hugely key in keeping a loyal band together. Making sure that your band, even if you can't pay a huge amount per show, just showing them that you actually value their input, and so give them a percent of the song if they helped make it what it is. A song is more than just lyrics and a melody. We did Harold Fair did a cover of Wicked Game, and that lick, that famous lick off the top, and that was created by his guitar player. And I believe the song did okay when it came out, and then it was used in a David Lynch movie, and suddenly it was a huge hit. And the guitar player said, hey man, like that's kind of the hook of the song, and it became, I think, a groundbreaking legal battle, because you hear that in 1 second and it's Wicked Game. So it's important to sort of to value that, and if you're the songwriter and you've got a band together, that's a really good way to just show people that that you value their contributions.
I did not think we'd be talking Chris Isaak today, but there you go.
Boom! There you go.
Okay. So we're talking about valuing and protecting, or I guess valuing your work on the performance side, but I guess flipping that to the value of your product, your recorded works. Yeah, tell us a little bit about any solutions, any tips that you've got, especially since you've been woke to this challenges of the digital marketplace, but any tips for how people can make sure that their recorded work, that their songs, that they're straddling that balance between doing some things where the value isn't monetary, but rather for the always elusive quote-unquote exposure, or where you're making decisions based on opportunity and promotion to help advance your career, where the value isn't necessarily money, but also making sure that you're not getting hosed and that you're still able to put a few dollars in your pocket. Yeah, anything come to mind that you've put into practice fairly recently?
I think definitely registering everything. I mean, it's as if you had any song you write is like coming up with a discovery, and so you want to patent that, right? So joining SOCAN and make sure that you register your songs with SOCAN, even if it's an arrangement of a traditional song or something that you think is, it's got to take. There's so many different categories for how to break down who wrote a song on the SOCAN website, so you can, you get 50% if it's such and such or whatever. But it's really important to do that. If you're a side person, registering with MROC for neighboring rights, or ACTRA, those things are really important, just to sort of have that sort of byproduct or diverse revenue streams. But yeah, I think intellectual property is important, and making that decision. I mean, it's such a personal decision, I guess. But if an opportunity came up to me and someone said, "Oh, you could do this and get exposure. It's in this film," or you won't be paid, but it's in a film. I mean, at a certain point, case by case, you have to figure does this get me anywhere? I mean, sometimes you don't know where the next thing will happen, and I think allowing that sort of alchemy to happen, where things are out in the world you don't even know they're working for you, but they are. Sure, okay, but if this is, if you're going out of your way and this is a huge, it's a thing that you feel uncomfortable about, I think trusting your gut is a really important thing. It sounds dumb to say because it sounds so trite, but there definitely have been a lot of times where someone has told me, something, and I got the spidey sense, and I did it anyway, and it's sort of, come about as not the bad. I mean, for example, I was asked to play on a record, and I said, okay, sure, and they said, oh, we don't have a lot of money. In fact, we have no money. And I said, okay, well, I'd played with them before, and it felt like a nice thing to do, sort of like kind of a reunion type of deal. And before the session came up, they said, actually, we're fine. We found this session of you playing this song at a radio session, and we've just used that. So I got I got credit. Obviously, it says that I played it, but it was an arrangement of mine, actually, the tune to begin with. And I don't know what I sounded like when I was 21 on this radio session. So, I would have definitely probably said, no, I won't play on that, and then they couldn't have used it. I mean, does that sort of answer your question? I think using your gut is definitely number one.
Totally, and I've got to beg your pardon. I think I cut you out for about 15 seconds in there, just jumping onto a better network. But yeah, I got the gist of what you were saying, and very much appreciate it. So with that note, you mentioned a few that you were registered with, and it's certainly not your job to be the dot connector here, but like, just curious, ballpark, how many different rights organizations, music associations that are all involved in either directly generating revenue, or say maybe like the AFM, where they're indirectly leading you to these opportunities. How many different associations or organizations, even ballpark, are you with right now? And maybe the question is, like, were there any that you weren't aware of throughout some of your career and have only recently kind of tuned into?
Yeah, there were some for sure. Resound was one I didn't know about. I'm now registered. I mean, I'm sort of a weird at venue. You know, if you have to when you're on the road and you sell records, you have to report your sales, which goes into SoundScan, which then is used by Factor. I mean, there are obviously there are so many factors. An important one for Canadians at venue, Resound, MROC, ACTRA. SOCAN, obviously. I'm a funny breed though because I do have this boutique record label as well, so that has led me to be a part of SEMA and get involved on that side of things, which has been eye-opening. Yeah, no, but I have to say, I mean, I'll sort of just do a little sidebar here because I'm on some of these boards or I'm in meetings with managers and different people, and I talk about advocacy and sometimes people say, well, I don't think any of my artists would want to do that, and I have to say there's just sort of an overwhelming infantilization of artists. Not with everybody, obviously. There are incredible industry people who totally understand that artists are not just a different breed of people. We have brains as well. But I think getting involved in actually asking those questions and asking for transparency from all of the organizations is really important. So there are some of the boards and some of the companies who are collecting money for artists who don't have a single artist on their board. And, they just assume that artists don't want to sit through board. I mean, I was told once that, oh, I thought you'd be bored. You wouldn't want to sit through a board meeting. Well, I do, because I want to know exactly where my money is coming from or going or what's happening. I think being aware is step number one. And I think artists, this is number one point, I think artists need to take accountability ourselves and get involved and find out what's happening. And if there aren't any artists on an arts board, they need to ask why. I mean, what are they kind of keeping from us? And how would the conversation be different in a room if an artist was there? I mean, I've sat in some board meetings and just been wildly appalled thinking of what all of my artist friends would say, my musician friends would say if they heard the people who and what they're saying, and so I think the way to combat that is just more people getting involved, because it's necessary and it's possible, and it's not boring. It's really interesting, actually.
That is really, and maybe just as my own quick sidebar, not being an artist but having been on some boards that thankfully were comprised of a few artists. But that's also, not only is that a great proactive way to kind of take the reins on a part of your career and just better understand how things work so that you can take better advantage of it and help other people take advantage of it, but just in terms of a networking exercise, I found that being on these boards in a lot of cases outside of the work I've done with the associations has just led to all kinds of great opportunities, even just all kinds of great friendships and conversations with other people in the industry, peers, associates, and yeah, just a little bit of a sidebar there. But bringing it back here, appreciate that. I like when I'm not told that I'm out to lunch. What about grants and grant writing? Again, I know you come from a unique perspective with the label and with the festival, which we'll talk about some of these different projects in a second as far as diversifying revenue streams. But yeah, how integral are the wealth of arts grants that we're fortunate to have here in Canada to your, not just success, but just career as a creator?
We're very lucky in Canada. I mean, I should say that we do have a lot of incredible opportunities for public money and to apply. That's not to say that they're all created equal or that they have their processes are equal. There are some really difficult and sort of draconian processes in order to try to apply for money. One of the best, I should say, is the Toronto Arts Council. One of the best I've seen. They have a fantastic interface. It's really artist friendly, and in fact, they discourage. And I think I was on the jury. I believe that we we barred anyone from applying who had their manager apply or a grant writer. It was very artist-based and artist-friendly. So that was one that I really loved being part of. We have other ones, obviously, that where they're so intricate and crazy and have so many pop-up windows that having a grant writer is a good idea. But then why are we funding grant writers with all this money? I mean. And to be honest, I have a fantastic grant writer who's been helping me with the label stuff, because they're just volume-wise, it's insane. But I certainly have written my fair share of grants and gotten a few and been turned down for many. So it certainly helped. One of the things I think that really, if you have never written a grant and you just have a grant writer, writing one gives you clarity, and having to focus on your project actually will make your project so much better. I had one horrible story where I written this whole thing. It had taken so long, and finished it, and then did some sort of, I don't know, my computer did that thing, or I lost the whole thing, and so I had to go back and spend that many more hours redoing it. But actually, even the second time, it was so much more clear, and I had all these amazing breakthroughs in my project, and it ended up being this. I mean, I ended up getting the grant, and it ended up actually just being such a ray of light, weirdly, just because I had to go through that exercise of the deeper dive. So they can be very clarifying.
Well, there you go. Yeah, like Miranda says, there's plenty out there, and plenty to read through to make sure that you are nailing every line of that application and giving people exactly what they ask for, to make sure that A, your chances of being awarded the grant are high, and subsequently B, that you are not wasting your time.
Calling everybody, like they all have supervisors, and what I found is you're reaching out to the supervisors and saying, hey, I've got this question about my project, is it eligible, what do you recommend? And honestly, they want to help you, they want you to get that money, and they want to facilitate, and even just building a relationship with them is great, because one of the things I found was actually one of the best musical experiences, like life experiences, was being on the jury for the Toronto Arts Council grant, for the sound recording and demo grant. We had 326 applicants, and you listen to two songs from each applicant, as well as reading their full application. I mean, it took me so many hours, but it was so revealing, and it was all different genres. And so then you get in a room with, I think there were 5 of us and our facilitator, and talking about music with people who it was a guy who was a hip hop artist, he was incredible, classical musician, jazzer. Like, it was just getting in the room and realizing that no matter our vocabulary, we're all talking about music and have these instincts. So when you talk to facilitators, make yourself available to be on a board, to be on a jury board, because they are very, very, very illuminating.
Awesome. Oh, we're going all sorts of places. This is great.
I'm sorry, I'm not sticking to your. I'm not really sticking to you.
No. This is exactly why we wanted to have you, and I emphasize the candidness here a lot, just because, there's so many facets to this, and we've got some great questions pouring in that we'll jump to shortly. We've got time. I don't want to be too quick here. I also want to preface this by saying, not everyone is going to start a music festival. Not everyone is going to start a record label. But I think just talking about these experiences, these initiatives, might just be food for thought, to let people know that there's lots that you can be doing with and around music, complementary activities with a lot of potential for cross growth. That basically, help keep you busy and ultimately diversify your revenue stream. So why don't we start with the Sawdust City Music Festival here. The first edition just happened August 2017. By everything that I read about it, it seemed to be a great success for what I thought was, relatively humble beginnings. You made your mission very clear of just bringing the arts to Gravenhurst and trying to stimulate some business and tourism in and around the town. Maybe start, like, where did this idea come from, and what were your goals at the outset with producing this first year of the festival?
Well, I've been producing shows on a really micro level for years. I had a little series. I live in Parkdale, and I had a little series called La Belle et Parkdale. Super nerdy. and put on some different music shows in little found sort of unusual venues. So I had one in a fine dining restaurant, one in a vintage store, and one in a hair salon. And it was just sort of applying the same idea, which I think, not everyone has to start a music festival, but using that sort of micro idea of community and bringing people together, bringing musicians together, not necessarily the same genre, but sort of shining a spotlight on them or on their similarities. I don't know if you've ever been to the Barnes exhibit in Philadelphia. It's this incredible art collection, and it's a mishmash. Like, it's this fellow, and he didn't. Every room is so different. There's a Monet next to a Van Gogh, next to a piece of modern art, next to an old sort of hanger that somebody created, like a wire kind of what do I call it? But anyway, it's just this mishmash, because I don't think that genre matters quite so much. But the festival was sort of just taking that kind of micro idea of just stuff you like and people you like, and creating an atmosphere for people to enjoy themselves, and magic things to happen musically, and then taking it to this macro level of putting it all in one town and doing it there. I have a lot of history there, family history there, so it made perfect sense. They have a lot of beautiful venues that we could use and sort of plug ourselves into. So it wasn't a difficult leap, I should say.
And then I guess outside of the label, and if we want to talk a bit about the label, and I'd be curious as to how much of your time that takes, and how you evaluate that time versus the reward, financial or otherwise, that it brings to your career, if you want to go there. But I'll leave that open. But if not, I'd also just be curious about some of the other ways that you've diversified your revenue streams, maybe something that I haven't mentioned / don't know about. But yeah, well, I'd just like to hear about some of your different irons in the fire as far as ways to generate income that are directly or indirectly rooted in music.
Well, the label, it was more of a learning tool. To be honest, it started out, my record was the first record. I lived in Los Angeles for a while, so I had a Los Angeles-based artist as my second artist on the label. He's been nominated for some Grammys and things, so that helped me out. He was very generous to allow me to put out his record. He produced my record, so as I said, so there was some sort of affiliation there. But it really has been sort of a way that I could learn the business and ask the questions I need to ask. And now it's been a really great umbrella under which I can bring all of things I'm interested in or like, and try to use some of my experience to help other artists, and then also just the turnaround time. It's amazing, because I have this. If I decide I want to put out a single in a month, and I have it done, I can do all that back end stuff now. I know how to do it. I mean, I've certainly and again, like, the first year of the label was such a masterclass, and geez, I didn't know about that, and having to make a lot of very quick moves. But so that's really, right now, it's certainly not generating income. If I'd known how much time it was going to take up, I'm not sure I would have made that decision, but except that it has been a really incredible thing to have in my life, and has certainly let me meet a lot of great folks and learn a lot about the business from the inside out, which has definitely changed my perspective in a huge way, and probably led to most of the advocacy work I'm doing.
Advocacy work, both things that people can be doing on their own from their computer, or going out into the real world and trying to make things happen, as well as creating community and uniting with other people for a unified voice. We're casting a wide net here, and I'm sure we can jump into more specifics, but just knowing that it's something that you've been talking about a lot lately, what are some of the different ways that people listening right now can be helping themselves? I mean, I guess we can go back to copyright there to start off, because the government is currently undergoing a big review of the copyright laws. Melanie Joly, Minister of Canadian Culture and Heritage, leading the charge on this, and I think we're going to see a lot kind of coming down the pipe for this. Yeah, all this to say, how can we help? What can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Melanie Joly, our Minister Joly, made a speech today about the creative industries. Her particular she has a sort of a council that they've been in advisement for her over the past year, and it's primarily made up of fairly senior or mostly film people. There's one person who's sort of directly involved in music. And I think that was definitely reflected in her speech today, which focused primarily on film and television. Right. There wasn't a lot of food for the musicians and for things. I've been pretty vocal with our government about things like readdressing, obviously, copyright, making some very small changes that like some that could actually make a lot of difference. And I've made a list of them, and they're on my website on my speech. There's a couple things. There's some safe harbor laws that should change that were created 20 years ago that they don't work anymore. They're not helping us, and they're really actually just helping giant corporations that are based in Silicon Valley. So those are things that can change. I've just the Copyright Act reform review tomorrow is the deadline, and I'm submitting a letter strongly urging change to come to try to avoid any kind of political, finagling, which could be just pushing it back so it's not their problem. So I have a list of over 100 signatures on that, which I'm really excited about, and hopefully we'll get some response. Those things are definitely things that you can do. I think on a really small level, though, is being very honest about our situation. I know in this glossy Instagram, Facebook world, there's that real struggle as to what do we want. We want to project success, obviously, because that's what people like, and people, you put a picture of yourself up in a beautiful location or something, and you get 100 likes immediately. Or you put a poster of your Motel 6. People are like, you're not going to get the likes of that, but actually you do get the respect of your peers, and it's not easy. And I'll tell you, just sort of the mental fatigue of being very open and transparent. It was really difficult, and that's why I sort of called the speech Redefining, because you have to feel like a success even though the money might not be what you'd hoped, or because strictly based on the system, really not what you're doing. But I think that's really as a brave and important thing, because after I did the speech, my first original speech, it was a thank you to Music Canada's Graham Henderson, and I sort of just talked. It was very brief about my plight and sort of my situation, and then which led to the Economic Club keynote. And after that, the amazing thing was how many artists have reached out since then and said, "Oh my God, me too." I thought it was just me, and there's this sort of real perception problem that we have, where we want to look successful to our fans, and we want them to like us, and they want, look at the inside of a tour bus. But another sidebar, tour buses can be really gross. I mean, they're just these horrible tin cans, like but the idea of it is so glamorous to people who are not in the business. And so anyway, I think being honest, which will create sort of a new currency amongst us, and talking to people, being able to say, hey, what do you make as a side person with that person? Because I just got offered this, and I don't even know if that's okay anymore. So that kind of thing is important, and also just being honest about your situation. Throw up one photo about some grimy truck stop that you had to stop in because you do. Just so, because I think people have this idea. I think a lot of the public has this idea that it is such a glamorous thing, and there's even this sort of bohemian aspect that I think people really. So even when you're like, I'm living in poverty, but I've got a bottle of wine, people kind of still think that that's romantic in a way. And I think just being honest and saying, like, I have to get my teeth fixed, and I don't have the money to do that, and it's actually a problem. That's something that people should probably hear, because they come up to you at the gigs and they say, "Oh, I just streamed your record on Spotify." You're like, "Thank you for that 0.001 cent. That's amazing." I appreciate your support of my career. So just being honest about that.
Spot on. Well, here we go. We've got some great questions. One of which, right to your point there, you've had people come up after shows and tell you that they've streamed your album. We can chuckle about that and know how insignificant that is from a monetary perspective. So yeah, on a similar note, Madeline is wondering, and I guess especially for a more emerging artist, but in your opinion, in your experience, Miranda, is it still worth it to try and sell music, digital and or physical? I mean, is there still money to be made in, investing in a recording and then working to get a return off of directly selling that product to your fans and consumers?
I'm finding that at shows, people do, the one thing that they can't stream is the experience. So, when you have that amazing alchemy in a show and fans watch your show and they experience something with a bunch of strangers that they, and they have that, you can't buy that, you can't watch that on YouTube. You can watch versions of it, but they're going to so they want to take something away from that. So if you can offer something as a token, it's something that they can buy that will remind them. So, whether that be a CD, for sure. I think it is important to have a very high quality representation of what you sound like. That is important for sure. And not necessarily has to be a full length record. You can do, you can do anything these days, but you could do a little EP that's just, one sleeve. Those don't cost very much money, but it's something that someone can have signed and they feel like they had some transaction with you and interaction. I think that's really important. But there's other people who do other things. Like I was at a show and they were selling pickles. I mean, I'm not going to stay up all night canning pickles, but it's just something that people, that's something special that people can feel like they have a transaction with you. And that will also, there's a bit of ownership, especially if you're an emerging artist. I think people want to feel like they discovered you first and they're telling people about you, and that is important, definitely, to have some sort of a takeaway. I know a musician friend of mine, he's just pulled all of his music off of digital platforms, which, I'm not, he kind of grew up in an age where he could play on Stuart McLean and sell, 300 records in one day. That doesn't happen anymore. It's just, that's the reality. But the discoverability, I do get that. There is discoverability of having things available on digital. But vinyl there's a huge resurgence in vinyl, so I feel as though, which is expensive and takes a long time. Always, I think, just from a planning point of view, if you want to have vinyl coming out on your release day, then make sure you order it 6 months before your release day, because it does take a really long time. And when they tell you that they can rush it, that's not always true. So. But that's another good thing, that takeaway that people are actually buying and collecting. So that's encouraging.
All right, on. Here, I'll tell you what, in the interest of time and just because we want to serve our audience, I'm going to take a stab at this, but I will stop talking as quickly as I can, and if you want to add anything in, would be great. But to what we were talking about with grants there, Chris says, it amazes me that granting organizations judge demos on the quality of the recorded submission. Is it not the point of a demo grant that you don't have a perfectly recorded submission? What I was going to say, it harkens back to read everything, know exactly what you're applying for, who's going to be reviewing the application, and specifically like what that program is giving money for. First and foremost, but you're absolutely not wrong. It is a weird body, and Miranda said, some of them have seemingly just dubious or unclear submission guidelines. I've been on juries before where the exact same submission on 2 different rounds was told exactly, like given completely 100% contradictory advice as to why they weren't successful based on the quality of a recording. So yeah, I mean, there are flaws in every system, but as long as you're prepared and are doing your research, that's going to give you the best shot at being successful. There's a lot of opportunities, and that's a lot of reading, but could result in a lot of money.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is when you're submitting, I mean, most of the demos and most of those grants, they give you a sort of an opportunity to say what would change when recorded on whatever the next thing you're doing. and using that opportunity to be as specific as possible, even making references to other records. You could say, you know, actually, this is the song that I'm going to record. I prefer a bit more of the Bowie era 1980 production, like this song on the, you know, just being really specific about what will change and how. But you know, when I was on that jury, it was very interesting because I found that a lot of people who were not in my genre, folk songs don't always come across. They don't lift off the page the way that some big band song is gonna, or album, you know, or an amazing hip hop track can. Mm-hmm. So I had to sort of fight for a lot of people, you know, for a lot of the folk artists, and say, well, this is sort of, it's three chords in the truth, and they're doing it really well, and listen to this songcraft, you know, this is amazing. And you know, so yeah, I certainly hear that problem. But calling, like you point to your point too, Andrew, I think one thing is when if you aren't chosen, phoning in or emailing the supervisor, and they always have to have feedback that they can give you. And yeah, you might get totally, you know, disparate feedback, but actually it is really helpful.
Spot on. Another one, a bit out of left field. In fact, we were talking about this on a previous session. Does the mail your songs to yourself legally apply for protection anymore? Again, I'm not a pro on this, but drawing on from what our good friend Byron Pascoe from Edwards PC Creative Law said the last time this came up, that's a method of, you know, the postal stamp proving that you created something, in the case where if a song ever came out with the exact same hook or the exact same lyrics in the chorus, that you can say, hey, look, I wrote this first. But that is not helping you in terms of, like, you still need to be registered with SOCAN, register with Resound. That's how you're going to, A, get recognized for any use of your work, and B, get money for it. If it's just a matter of having a record that you created something first, sure, but I'm just not really sure how that's going to help you unless you get ripped off. But
well, it's also free. It's free to register your song with SOCAN, and it's dated, and it's, you know, once it's there, it's there. I mean, I can't even make it to the post office just to like mail a postcard to my mom, you know. So I don't know how many you're gonna write a song and then send it to yourself. But no, I think yeah, definitely just, you know, have it registered, which is the easiest. You can do it. You know, you could have done it since the time we started talking about this question. So yeah.
But then we wouldn't have had your complete attention. So thanks for waiting until the end.
Thanks and then,
yeah. And actually, now's as good of a time as any to plug that we will have a session coming up too with a representative from SOCAN, sort of a 101 on what the organization does, how and why you should be a part of it, etc. So coming up. And one more here. There's one more question in the queue. If anyone else wants to fire something at us, please do. But yeah, we've got one of our attendees says, I'm producing, arranging, composing, and playing on a couple of singer-songwriter projects. Am I entitled to any of the songwriting, I'm assuming you mean songwriting credit, or split of the songwriting royalties? Thank you. The answer, almost definitely, with everything you're doing here, is yes, although there is like a producer credit and different arrangements that come with that. But I guess, Miranda, from your perspective as an artist that has done arranging and composing and session playing and producing, how do you recommend someone go ahead and, before getting into these kind of arrangements, make sure that all of the business side is taken care of beforehand, or even in the moment if something changes from that original deal?
Yeah, I think, well, like you said, I think before is the best way. You know, things can always get put aside, and then you say, oh, we'll deal with it afterwards, and that's actually when it gets really hairy and nobody wants to talk about it. Producing, obviously, I'm sure that you're, that's a lot of hats, by the way. Awesome. Well done. But producing, you know, you worked out a deal with the singer-songwriter. I mean, obviously, if you're doing all those things, you're probably taking some you know, fairly basic things and making it into a new thing. And that is definitely something that needs to get worked out. The arrangements, some of that stuff, definitely getting arranging credits on it. Depends on what you're actually adding. Like if you're adding certain bridge elements or things specifically. But there's definitely grounds to say to the songwriter, and there is room on the SOCAN form that you can fill in different things and different percentages based on other things, and that is definitely worth, like, I mean, to my money, to if you're producing and you're doing all of that, I would ask, you know, I would give you 50% because that's, you're making something a whole other new thing. But that's definitely a conversation you can have with the songwriter, and you definitely should have. And I don't think it should be a one-time fee. That sounds like something that should be in perpetuity.
Bingo. And to be clear there, like one-time fee or sometimes like on spec is where you would come to an arrangement and you help the artist on the project, and then it's said and done, you get paid, and then everything that is generated or results from that recording down the road goes to them. What Miranda is saying is if you're this involved in the project, you should have some splits to some rights on the back end as well, so that if something you worked on, say, gets picked up for a TV show or yeah, it becomes huge in Germany, as seems to so often be the case in lore, that you're properly being compensated for your work.
This is probably going to sound really sophomoric, but I want to say this just on the subject of doing arrangements and things like that. At any point when you're recording, always have instrumentals of your songs, because a lot of times when people are looking for music for film and television, they need the instrumentals because there might be voiceover that they have to cut in and out of, and you can't really, once you've done it, you know, once you've recorded the album, and if you don't have that, or you don't have the stems to make that, it can be very difficult. And they move so quickly that if you had to go back and get the stems and make that, it would be really prohibitive, and they would probably just move on. But that's a really, just a simple thing to do when you're making your mixes. Take the vocals out of them and get around to that, and keep those, because if you are ever intending to have it placed for film and television, that's 99% a necessity.
Boom. Oh, I love this. Wise words and another great plug. After our session tonight, which we're going to wrap up here, a recording, you'll get an email with a recording to the session that you can access on demand at your leisure. If you go to nwcwebinars.com too, you can access recordings of all of our past sessions, including one with our friend Andrea Irau about just that, about getting your music placed in TV and film, what you need to know, with some great points like that one that come up too. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, once again, Miranda Mulholland, Redefining Success in a Digital Marketplace. Check out Miranda's work. Check out Harrow Fair, Sawdust City Music Festival, Roaring Girl Records. Anywhere else we should be sending people?
Well, that sounds pretty thorough.
Awesome. No, more than appreciate you not only joining us this evening, but just genuinely being a champion and advocate for creators, especially ones that haven't enjoyed as much success as you have. Yeah, it's been a privilege to be able to do this, and well, I'm sure I speak for everyone on my team to say I would love to keep this going. Let us know how we can help, and yeah, do check out Miranda's full speech, either the video or the transcript, for the Economic Club of Canada. She mentioned too Graham Henderson's, who delivered an address to the same group. You can find that online through Music Canada's website. And there you go. Don't forget to check out some of these titles here through our sister company, musicbooksplus.com. You go to musicbooksplus.com/webinar, 10% off some of these titles, and there's also some tips there to maximize your webinar experience when you join us next time in October with Byron Pascoe from Edwards PC Creative Law, talking about band agreements. What is it? Why do you need one? Please register, join us, and when the survey goes out at the end, please give us your feedback. Ultimately, we just want to be bringing you relevant, valuable content to help push you along in your career in the music industry. Blah. Miranda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out and has any questions or wants to know how to get more involved in advocacy or wants to know about the festival, I'm available at my name at roaringgirlrecords.com.
Bingo. And aking@nord.com is me if I can help plug you into smart people like Miranda. Some thank yous coming in from our audience, and that's a great place to end it. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and we look forward to having you back.